Thank you for watching this series on the history of strategic bombing from 1911 to Vietnam and beyond. We decided though to do an additional episode to cover some information not covered in previous episodes. This includes the disparity of Victoria Crosses awarded to Bomber Command personnel and how the RAF managed personnel on dangerous operations, i.e. how do you get the young men to fly in the first place. We also cover possibly a lost clue with the infamous LMF, lack of moral fibre, with the establishment of what was basically an Aircrew Detention Centre at Royal Air Force Norton in Sheffield, where we are doing the filming today, which is rarely talked about. We shall look into the ranks of the aircrew for both Royal Air Force and US Army Air Force and how it differed slightly. And finally we shall look at the role of the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue, formed in 1942 to rescue aircrew from crashes in the mountains and moorlands of the United Kingdom in World War II. First though, we're going to look at the Victoria Crosses awarded to personnel of Bomber Command. This can be quite confusing when it comes to looking at lists. They quote anything from 13 VCs to 24 VCs, but I have set a parameter for the groups within Bomber Command. A Bomber Command were organised into 8 groups, initially with 1, 2 and 3 groups in 1936 on its formation, then 4 and 5 groups in 1937, 6 and 8 groups in January 1943, and 7 group which was formed in 1940 as a training unit of Bomber Command, spending 2 years as 92 operational training unit before becoming 7 group heavy conversion unit in late 1944. Within my parameters I found 22 VCs that can be directed to the groups of Bomber Command. It's also important to note that 2 group was transferred in June 1943 to the new Tactical Air Forces, 2nd Tactical Air Force, but any VCs won by 2 groups were before this date, so I've included them. To also note that Arthur Scarr flew a light bomber at Blenheim with 62 Squadron, but that was never part of Bomber Command's group system and they mainly served out in the Far East. Garland and Gray, as mentioned earlier, were part of 12 Squadron of 1 group Bomber Command, transferred temporarily to the Advanced Air Striking Force in France. Then the squadron was moved back to Bomber Command, number 1 group, with Wellington, so I've included these VCs. Also, Hugh Malcolm won a VC flying a Blenheim with 18 Squadron, which was originally part of 2 group, and again the squadron was transferred temporarily back to the United Kingdom under 2 group, so I've also included this brave VC. Now I'm showing a spreadsheet of the winners of the VCs within the groups of Bomber Command. You might notice the amount of VCs won by 5 group, nicknamed the Ice Cream Boys. A total of 9 VCs were won by 5 group compared to 2 by 1 group, 2 by 2 group, 3 by 3 group, 1 by 4 group, 1 in 6 group and 3 in 8 group. There are a number of reasons so many went to 5 group. They were seen often as an elite of Bomber Command with special units like 617 Squadron and 9 Squadron. Also, many of the missions were recorded in the news and highlighted to the public. But most of the squadrons in 5 group were standard heavy bomber squadrons. So another reason being possibly their group commander, Air Marshal Ralph Cochrane. Cochrane was a very influential commander within Bomber Command and possibly had more weight behind the awards of the VCs in his group. It is also interesting to note when you look at the aircraft types that VCs were won on. Again, top of the pile is the Avro Lancaster with 10 VCs. The Hampden has 2 VCs, Stirling 2 VCs, and Manchester 1 VC. Wellington just 1 VC with 12,000 produced. Halifax has these great models here. 6,000 built, only 1 VC. To say there was no disparity in VC winners, well, this evidence is plain to see. But they were all brave and deserved their VCs, no matter who promoted them to the award. But there must have been thousands of deeds of bravery within Bomber Command that could have deserved higher medals. The next thing we shall look at is the job of getting these young men to go onto the bombers in the first place. Some group commanders and station commanders handled it with some compassion. Others were slightly more direct. At least one base in 4 group in Yorkshire, new arrivals were told by the duty officer, "Fill your will out, you've got about 4 weeks to live." As a former member of the Royal Air Force who was stationed at a number of ex-bomber command bases, many of them known as expansion bases, I will give an example of Royal Air Force Leaming, where I spent about 6 years of my Royal Air Force career. RAF Leaming, part of number 4 group, but later transferred to 6 group Royal Canadian Air Force, had the unenviable record of one of the worst bomber command stations for loss of crews. It is estimated 3,000 aircrew were lost either flying from Leeming or crashing back on the station. Aircraft types such as the early Halifax and Stirlings did not help. Many of the buildings on the stations in the 1980s were of World War II vintage, including the hangars and technical sites. But one building always stood out as much newer. That was the Medical Centre. The reason is quite simple. Generally, on a wartime bomber command base, the station medical buildings and facilities were generally built off-site, around about a mile away. You would have obviously casual receiving facilities such as ambulances, but once in the care, injured and the dead, unfortunately, would be removed ASAP. The last thing you want is new young crews arriving daily, which they were doing as losses were mounting, seeing badly injured crewmen hanging around. It all needed to be up and at them, all booted and spurred once again for the next operation. This brings me to the somewhat sticky subject of LMF, lack of moral fibre, which was not a medical term but a strict discipline term. Records show about 2,700 had their record stamped LMF, split in the percentage of ranks found in the force, so about 2,300 NCOs and about 400 officers. There was some evidence that they thought some of it was class background, expecting ex-public school boys to show stiff upper lip than NCOs from state schools. Many modern historians and the MOD have tried to play down LMF with a simple stiff upper lip or complete breakdown. I think this is wrong, and like all things in life, it's on a spectrum, irrelevance of where you come from or your class or background. For, in my opinion, there were many more accused, even if at the very beginning. If you have thousands of young men, you're going to get problems, either bad discipline, insubordination, from mainly very bright young personnel, trying to have a bloody good time in what little time you've got left, or sexual infections, which were rife in Bomber Command, higher than any other command. Harris once stated, "My old lags," as he often referred to his crews, "generally don't have a long time on this earth. So while they're here, who can blame him for having a good time on the beer and chasing the ladies?" Like all large organisations, it needed a system for dealing with folks off the rails while trying to keep it in-house. This brings me on to talk about something that's rarely talked about. There is nothing on YouTube and very little online. This is the Aircrew Refresher Centre or Aircrew Detention Centre, or commonly known by the WAAF at Royal Air Force Norton in Sheffield as Bomber Command's Naughty Boys School. Royal Air Force Norton was a radar and radio convoy assembly unit and balloons, but also based for the Aircrew Refresher Centre. This comprised of a large officers' mess and a sergeant's mess with a large drill square. During the night, you were treated within your rank, but early in the morning, around about 0700, all were on the drill square, elements of rank for continuous drill and PT until about 1700 and then a meal. Then lectures until 2100 hours. Then there's a rush to the pub, so they let them go down the pub for the last hour. So not all bad, I suppose. You were sent there for such acts as unauthorised low flying, dropping bombs too early, insubordination, getting mega drunk and wrecking the local pub or messes, too many cases of sexually transmitted diseases, plus early signs of LMF. This is the lost clue to LMF. If a man is seen to be shaky but decent, off to the ARC he would go. How many went through these courses? Well, there's no real records publicity, and I've had trouble getting the information from the MOD. But one young WAAF stated, "Our unit was full of generally older men in this RAF backwater, when in the summer of 1943, hundreds of handsome young Bomber Command men turned up of all ranks." The Aircrew Refresher Centre ran from 1943 until the end of the war in Europe. In fact, it was actually combined from earlier centres earlier on. There was even a second site in Sheffield, but I can't find any information on that. The course was either 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on the seriousness of the offence. On completion of the shock treatment, as one air gunner put it, "I was as fit as a fiddle and could take a full station parade and did not want to go back. In fact, I'd rather go back to Berlin than back to Sheffield." There's no doubt it was there as a warning to the aircrew. Screw up, lose your nerve, and it's off to the ARC for you. After the course, aircrew was sent back to flying or re-mustered as ground crew, or in extreme cases discharged from the Royal Air Force or sent to the infantry. This shock treatment was not new. In World War I, some units, tired and exhausted, were sent to the French coast for what called so-called R&R, but found themselves in harsh training for about 10 days, beasted by ENSO instructors, nicknamed canaries for yellow bands on their hats and arms. In today's UK military, there's an establishment called HMMCTC, His Majesty's Military Corrective Training Centre, basically to put young UK servicemen back on track again. But the staff there are highly professional and have only got one interest: getting these young people back into the service system. We shall now look at the difference in rank for both the Royal Air Force Bomber Command and the United States Army Air Force. In the RAF, after August 1940, all aircrew coming through would all the minimum rank of sergeant. In training, especially after the introduction of 1942 of the PNB system, about 25% of the course, pilots, navigators and air bombers were commissioned, the rest given the rank of sergeant. All of the air gunners and wireless operators and flight engineers trained in the UK generally graduated as sergeants. It was not unknown, though, for an NCO pilot to lead as skipper other crewmen ranked as officers. Also, air gunners and wireless operators would also be commissioned during their tours, often taking the role of squadron gunner and wireless operator leaders. The other thing about Bomber Command was its diversity of crew, with many Afro-Caribbean members of Bomber Command and other ethnic minorities. In fact, ARIS issued one of the first anti-racial statements in the UK during the war, basically saying, if I find any of my crews getting a hard time over the colour of their skin, I will come down hard on the perpetrators. You are all members of Bomber Command. So odd, ARIS, a monster, issued one of the first anti-racial statements. The United States Army Air Force rank structure was much more rigid. They did train, though, about 3,000 NCO pilots, or flying sergeants. Most of these, though, went to fighters and transports, and many of them were given the rank of flight officer on fighter squadrons with blue bars, and some of these actually served on bomber formations. Most of the remaining NCO pilots served the rest of the war out flying the hump in China, Burma, with the rank of staff sergeant. Pilots, navigators, bomb aimers were all commissioned, and all the other crews, gunners, engineers and radio men, were sergeants, and this was strictly adhered to for most of the war. But towards the end of the war, with the crew's losses mounting and training kind of being run down, the job of the bomber togolier was introduced with the rank of sergeant. These would follow the lead of a commissioned bomb aimer and drop on his instructions, or when they saw the bomb aimer leader drop his bombs. Finally, we'll cover a little known aspect of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command training system. Crew losses, especially in the mountain areas of the UK. If crashes happened, and there were over 100 in the Peak District near Sheffield alone, little or no thought was ever given to the recovery of the aircrew, and many of them survived the crash only to die of hypothermia and other causes. In 1942, the Royal Air Force formed the Mountain Rescue Service in North Wales under Flight Lieutenant Doc Graham, and within days they were recovering casualties and returning them back to flying. The service grew during the war with many new teams and later desert rescue teams. And in 1944, Doc Graham was posted to Burma, where he set up the jungle rescue with the help of RAF and USAAF volunteers. The RAF were not really interested in this service, but the USAAF were. And Doc Graham was paratrained locally and soon rescued the first USAAF navigator lost in the jungle. They also pioneered the use of rescue helicopters with the use of the early overfly and that type of helicopter. The USAAF and later USAF formed the Pararescue Service with highly trained PJs or parajumpers, which are US Special Forces and in some cases Tier 1 Special Forces. All of this from an idea from a Royal Air Force officer and founder of the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue Service, but was unfortunately ignored by the RAF as far as combat search and rescue goes over the jungles. I spent a number of years in the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue Service, being one of the youngest ever to join and pass its trial and selection at the age of just 17 years old. And I will cover this little known part of the Royal Air Force in a later video. This brings an end to the VE Day to VJ Day series, and we hope you've enjoyed it. And we'd like to thank all the viewers and subscribers for your support. Thank you very much.